Hello, my name is John Bessire. Welcome to the show, John's World. Today's show we're filming the Aviation Museum in San Carlos, and most of the show today will be really to explain more about the exhibits here.
Thanks, John. I've actually been with the Hiller Museum, creating it for 10 years now. The museum's only 8 years old, so I actually started before the museum was here in helping in the creation of the facility with Mr. Hiller. So been around here a long time, done the tour a couple times, and we have some great things. And what a lot of people don't realize is how much the Bay Area is rich in history of aviation. Most people think of Kitty Hawk and the Wright brothers and Kansas and all the Midwest and the East as being a place of the aviation, but it really, a lot of it happened right here. So we'll take you through a tour of that today, and then hopefully you'll come back and visit us in person. Well, we've got quite a few very famous ones and interesting ones. The first airplane ever taken off and landed on a ship. The first airplane to ever do a loop in this country. We have the Boeing SST, which is supersonic transport. We have the front end of a 747. So we got a lot of neat things to go along here and talk about today. One of the neat things, actually, we're standing right next to is this mural. We like to, when people first come in, is ask them if they know where this mural is, where it's from. And the answer is, that is Tan Fran. That is the Tan Fran racetrack, or Seabiscuit race. We can relate to that. It was also a Japanese intern camp in World War II. And today, it is a mall, a shopping mall. But back in 1911, it was the site of the very first air meet that happened in Northern California. And so it was a pretty historic time that all these airplanes came out for the very first time in Northern California in 1911 and flew right at Tan Fran. The theme of the Hiller Aviation Museum is looking back over 100 years and looking to the future 100 years. Now, looking back over 100 years is a difficult thing to do because the Wright brothers just flew in 1903. But there was actually some aircraft that flew before that, and we have some of them on display here at the Hiller Aviation Museum. One of them flew in 1869. Now, that was over 30 years before the Wright brothers flew. And it had all the same characteristics of the Wright brothers except one thing. It had a delta-shaped wing, and it had 1 horsepower steam engine that turned bamboo cranks and shafts, and it had a controllable tail. It had a gas bag filled with hydrogen for buoyancy to help it generate lift, but it had to have lift over the wings to achieve lift. So it was heavier than air. The only thing it didn't have that the Wright brothers did have was a pilot. It was unmanned. They actually ran underneath it with tether lines as it went around the racetrack as their first flight. On their first flight, it flew for over a mile. The Wright brothers' first flight was only 120 feet. So this was a remarkable thing for 1829. And that's it right above me here at the museum. It is called the Aviator Hermes Jr. Now, it was called Junior because the design was to build one that was 4 times as big as this, 200 feet long. Ours is 50 feet. But it was just a remarkable feat for 1869. Now, there's a lot of people ask, well, why haven't you heard about the Aviator before? Well, there was some good things and bad things of why, having it happen here in the San Francisco Bay Area. The San Francisco Bay Area in 1869, the good side of that was that San Francisco was a port of call for Asia. So Frederick Marriott, the designer and builder of the aircraft, was able to get the bamboos he needed and the silk fabrics and all the light material he needed to build his aeroplane. What it was the bad side of being the San Francisco Bay Area in 1869 was that it was the Wild Wild West. All the major political, financial, education, all of these institutions were on the East Coast. And yet this happened on the West Coast, and this was still considered like the Wild Wild West. We like to point out that Custard was still alive when this took place. So I think it was viewed as more of a stunt than it was of an actual aircraft, an important thing really flying. But it did fly, and it flew for many times. Well, one time when it flew, a young boy saw it fly, and he was so excited about it. He was 12 years old. He went home, and he built a model of it. And then he would go to the beach and build and watch seagulls fly and do their wings, sketch their wings and see where their shapes were. Well, anyway, he went on to become a professor at the University of Santa Clara, and his name is John Montgomery. John Montgomery is credited for being the first person to have controlled flight, but not power, but man-controlled flight. And that's Mr. Montgomery on our glider right over here. He did that in 1883, 20 years before the Wright brothers flew. And being a professor at the University of Santa Clara, he wrote many papers about aerodynamics and what the parabolic wing shapes and wing warping and all those type of things that the Wright brothers studied. And after studying other inventors like Lilienthal, the Wright brothers realized that Montgomery really knew what he was doing, and they changed a lot of their design to closer to his design, and in 1903 achieved that first flight of a powered man-controlled aircraft. So it's interesting to see the ties of that come back to right here into the San Francisco Bay Area. Now, we talked about John Montgomery and flying in 1883 in his Gull, which was the first not powered, or man-controlled flight, not powered. Well, in 1905, he built a glider called the Santa Clara with the university students at Santa Clara. And it's right here above me, and that is the Santa Clara. Flew in 1905 at the university, and the reason why the pilot there has such a neat little, let's call it a test pilot outfit on there, is because he was from the circus. His name was Maloney, and he was a circus aerobat. In 1905, you couldn't put an ad in the paper for pilots because there weren't any. So they had to go to the next crazy bunch of people, which apparently are circus people, and grabbed Mr. Maloney there that was a high trapeze circus guy. And so he used to fly this glider, and the way that they got it, his propulsion system was a hot air balloon. And they would raise it up with a hot air balloon as high as 4,000 feet. And then he'd cut himself loose and glide down over the University of Santa Clara. So a pretty exciting feat for 1905. And early as 1908, they were trying vertical flight, which is an amazing feat considering, again, the Wright brothers only flew in 1903 at the end in December. And then there was many years of really no flying. It wasn't until about 1907, 1908 before airplanes even started to be seen by the public. So in 1908, they figured, let's try to do vertical flight, like a helicopter. So Professor Irvine, in 1908, in San Francisco, built the Cycloid, which is right here behind me. It has a 7-horsepower Indian motorcycle engine, and it had these paddles that would spin around real fast, and it was supposed to achieve lift. And then you could bend the paddles left and right to go left and right. Well, it didn't actually fly. It was very heavy, the bamboo was even too heavy for this, and it didn't have enough power. The concept, though, is an accurate concept of what he was doing, and the Germans in World War II were even using these type of concepts for vertical flight. So it is a good concept, but in 1908 it just wasn't something that was going to fly. One thing a lot of people don't know is that naval aviation actually started right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most people think it's back east in Virginia or Pensacola, but it actually started right here in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1911 when pilot Eugene Ely, right behind me here, flew this Curtiss Pusher, taking off from Tan Fran Airport, the airport you saw when we were in the introduction, and then flying out over Oyster Point, down the bay, till he found the USS Pennsylvania, which was moored right off of Yorba Buena Island. Goat Island, actually, was called in those days. Later be Treasure Island, a lot of people think of it today. And it was moored out there in the bay, and it was a very foggy, kind of drizzly January day in 1911. And Eugene Ely found the ship. It was a cruiser that had been fitted with a deck on top of it, 30 feet wide and 130 feet long. Then they took the sailors' sea bags, filled them with sand, tied ropes to them, and laid the ropes across the deck. And they hung a meat hook from the bottom of the airplane. And so at 10:35 on January 18th, 1911, Eugene Ely made the first naval trap, catching the 13th of the ropes successfully and stopping about a yard from the mast of the ship. They had a barrier set up from the mast of the ship. And then he got out, had lunch with Captain Pond, and then turned around and took off and flew back to Tan Fran racetrack. So that was the beginning of naval aviation, the first naval trap, even though it would be 10 years before they built the Langley, which was the first naval aircraft carrier. And so this is Eugene Ely flying the Curtiss Pusher. Now right above Eugene Ely there is the Vin Fizz. And the Vin Fizz was the first airplane to ever fly across the country. It was in a race put on by William Hearst in the Examiner that the first airplane to fly across the country in under 30 days would receive $50,000. A lot of money in 1911. And so the race was on. Unfortunately, Cal Rogers flying the Vince here took him about 45 to 50 days to make that trip. So even though he got the credit of winning the race and being the first one to cross the country, he didn't collect the money. But he did make it, and we like to remind people when they come to the museum, the next time they argue or get upset that they're flying from here to New York and it takes 5 or 6 hours and there's a delay, to remember old Cal Rogers, and it took him almost 2 months to fly across the country.